Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the Engage podcast. Apologies for a slightly longer delay since our last episode. I must confess that is almost entirely my fault.
You know what? I'm not sure I'd necessarily call it your fault, but you were away, weren't you?
I was away. Well, I've been up in Scotland, actually.
Indeed.
Can I quickly tell you about my train journeys?
Yeah, you can if you want to.
I mean, you already know about them, but this is mainly for the benefit of our loyal following, because they will be concerned. Firstly, on the way up, I sat next to a wonderful lady who was very willing to share about lots to do with her life and was very clear about her political convictions. And if you remember, you were helping me, you were editing my long read on Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
So I was trying to engage with your comments and make changes and edits, all the while very conscious that at any point she might look over my shoulder and see what I was writing and think I was some absolute whack job. So that was very stressful. And then on the way back, I was sick.
Oh dear.
On the train.
That's not pleasant.
No, it was horrible. And then on the side of the train when I got off, it was awful. It just looked like I'd gone up to Scotland for a massive stag do and was living with the consequences.
Well, is that why you were up in Scotland?
How dare you, sir? How dare you? No, I was up in Scotland to celebrate 40 years of CARE's presence in Scotland. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
That is fantastic.
So we had a wonderful afternoon tea with some of our major donors and senior church leaders from across denominations in Scotland. And then in the evening, we came together with our supporters, and it was just a fantastic evening. And I got to see, I've got two friends left in Scotland, and I got to see both of them together. So, I was in the promised land. I was in Edinburgh. I will never get closer to glory than that sweet, sweet couple of hours that I had in Edinburgh, which I call the New Jerusalem.
Definitely something slightly dodgy.
Isaiah 65 is a prophecy about Edinburgh.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I guess we'll be coming on to some similar topics later, won't we?
No, that's true. And what you're very artfully doing there is you're moving us away from my train stories and you're getting us onto the content that we want to talk about. But before we do, can I just say, after making some snide comments about how you dress...
Yeah, very unfair, I thought.
I don't think they were unfair. Isaac, can you adjudicate on this? I said that Peter occasionally, as in most of the time on this podcast, dresses in such a way as to look somewhat less smart than he looks now.
I think you called him a slog.
Okay, well, word smurds. Recollections may vary, to quote from Her Late Majesty the Queen.
And yet the evidence is out there on YouTube.
yeah, that's true. Yes. I have forgotten that.
Been caught.
I have been guilty, but you're looking very smart today.
Thank you very much.
How did you get on with your preach?
Yeah, no, fine, thank you.
Because that is what you wear for preaching in the Anglican Church? In the modern Anglican Church?
It's got to be all things to all people,
Okay, yeah. You do know that non-conformity has some advantages. No, we're going to talk about Keir Starmer's conference speech, because party conference season is interesting, but the big conference every year is the party of government. What is the Prime Minister going to say? What's the narrative and so on? So let's start with Keir Starmer's speech. And why don't you start by giving me a mark out of 10? If you were to grade his speech, just in general, what would you give him for this particular performance?
Good question. I reckon I'll give him a 7.
You give him a 7?
Yeah.
That's quite high.
Well, it depends what you're counting as average, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true. And actually, generally, would you say that the level of his communicative ability at set-piece speeches is not the highest we've seen from prime ministers?
I think that would be a fair comment. Although I did enjoy his joke about his dad.
Yes.
And you probably all know what he does by now.
Yes.
That was kind of nice to see him playing to the crowd.
I agree. And actually, so I thought this was probably the best speech that he's given. Not just since becoming prime minister, but since becoming leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is because it contained within it just a number of, I think, key ingredients that make a party conference speech work really well. So number one, there was a little bit of personal self-awareness, and that particularly came through in the joke he made about his dad's occupation. Of course, the joke being that he kept on going on about his dad made tools, and he did so again. But the other thing was he weaved in a narrative into this particular speech.
Yeah.
It began with the fact that working class people have felt let down by the establishment, and there are a number of examples of that. But now we have two choices. It's about national renewal, or it's the path of grievance and playing the victim. And then as he moved through, he talked about the achievements of the government over the past 12 months. And it kind of had built to a crescendo, and then one followed the other, followed the other, followed the other. It was a very powerful moment. And the other thing that I thought he did well was as he kind of came into lands, you did begin to get a sense of what is this man's heart for this country? Where does he want to take us? And that has been a constant criticism of Starmer. You know, there's that great Bible verse, without vision, the people perish. And actually, there's an element to which I think without vision, we do wither a little bit on the vine. And I think he began to address that in this speech. So all of that was there, some personal references to individuals who've done great things in their community, but also talking up, for example, shipbuilding on the Clyde and the frigate contract that we won compared to all these other countries who were going in. Yes, it's playing to the crowd. His main audience was the Labour faithful. But also, he clearly did have one eye on the wider political moment we find ourselves in.
I mean, more than one eye, actually.
I
think that, for me, actually, was the really big takeaway from the speech.
Yes.
I mean, as he joked at the end, the days of the Conservatives are done. And the line, now the Tories, do you remember them?
Yes. Well, I did a little thing. I decided to go through his speech and tally up how many times he mentioned Farage and Reform.
Yeah.
How many times he mentioned the Tories, and then how many times he mentioned Liz Truss.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just as a separate item. She warranted her own separate line. Because he mentioned Liz Truss, guess how many times?
Well, I've now seen your answer.
Okay, well, that was completely... Isaac, hold on. Isaac, how many times did he mention Liz Truss in his speech?
3.
Oh, close, twice. How many times do you think he mentioned the Tories?
Twice.
3 times, very close. How many times did he mention Nigel Farage or Reform?
6.
At least 8 times. No, 7 times. I mean, that tells you everything, doesn't it? That's your point.
Well, yeah, exactly. We are now in an age currently where two-party politics is not Labour and Conservatives.
Yeah.
It is looking like it is Labour versus Reform.
Yeah.
And it is quite an extraordinary story for a party which had... I think, first of all, it had 5 MPs, although I do kind of keep losing track of where it is. First had 5 MPs just over a year ago. I mean, it's only just over a year since the general election. And yet now they are leading in the polls and have been for some time, and they are seen as the big opposition, not in seats, but in terms of national influence. And you can tell that from the way in which Starmer is speaking. There were a lot of... you could say personal attacks on Nigel Farage and the kind of politics which he represents. So Labour is pretty concerned. And the way in which Keir Starmer phrased some of these things I actually think was quite clever, in that he effectively set up 2 different versions of politics and 2 different versions of Britain. So you've got competing visions at play here. So he sort of characterised Farage's politics as the sort of politics of grievance, and a Britain which is effectively based around division. That is sort of the national identity which he is claiming Farage is for. Whereas on the other hand, you've got some of Labour's greatest hits. You've got things like the NHS.
Yeah.
But much more broadly, the vision of sort of communities which are working for everyone. And that was sort of partly why his opening about particularly looking to engage some of the traditional working class support matters, because it's a Britain for everyone.
But it's also about making sure that he appeals to the core of Labour.
Well, yes, or the traditional core of Labour.
Absolutely. The same people who would stand up and cheer wildly whenever Gordon Brown spoke at conference, because they'd be like, yes, this is the kind of moral economics that's why we're part of the Labour Party, and, you know, the language of lifting children out of poverty and really addressing those structural reasons why poverty exists. They would really get on board with that. And there's always been a danger for Starmer that while he was in leader of the opposition, everyone, I think, gave him grace because he was clear he was trying to sort out the Labour Party, get it fit for government. Then he becomes Prime Minister, and he does have to govern for the entire country, including everyone who didn't vote for him. And along the way, and this happens for every Prime Minister, the party faithful start to get restless. When are we going to hear the beats that we want to hear, the beats that are traditionally Labour? And I agree with you. I think the start around working class was really effective. But I think also the way that he sort of chided them a little bit by saying, actually, do you know, wanting to control our borders is not an un-Labour thing to want. And it's not an unreasonable thing to want. I thought that was a very... But doesn't that just tell you how Reform have dominated the political agenda.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's this concept called the Overton window, isn't there?
Yeah.
Which is sort of the idea of there are sort of certain opinions which are publicly acceptable. The Overton window on immigration has massively shifted.
Yes.
And I would actually argue in the last 5 years, to be honest, it's a pretty recent thing. So to be at the point now where Labour, which under Tony Blair that was the sort of first big opening of the borders, wasn't it?
Yes.
So the sort of new Labour model of let's kind of bring in everyone, and immigration is really good for the economy, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
But we have shifted a long way from that. So if you think back 5 years ago, what is now being termed as the Boris wave, where the Conservatives, again, under the Conservatives, there was this massive influx in immigration, predominantly for economic reasons.
Yeah.
Well, now it is sort of being accepted. It's not actually racist to kind of be slightly concerned about people coming into the country when we don't know who they are, where they're from, or what they want to.
And actually, the two bits in connection with that I found most striking. The first was when he framed the establishment as being complacent. So working class people had done their dues, they'd lived through Brexit and COVID, they'd played by the rules, they'd kept their side of the social contract with the state. But instead of responding to that, the state had ducked the challenge of national renewal. And he talks about how that's the only way to describe it, complacent. We place too much faith in globalization. The establishment across so many institutions, I even find myself doing a slightly nasally thing, in hock to its lazy assumptions that immigration is all, that was a terrible Starmer impression, is all we need, that immigration is all we need to give us the workers. Infrastructure will always be there because we built it decades ago. The world always on hand to give us the goods. It doesn't matter if our industry leaves. It doesn't matter if we don't train our young people. It doesn't matter if wealth creation is hoarded by just a few communities. And his point is that actually, if you look at us now, we're in a world of insecurity. And that's partly because of that complacency. I thought that was really interesting. The other bit I found really interesting was when he quoted from meeting a voter.
I was going to come on to this one as well.
This is very powerful. A voter in Oldham, in the by-election there, and he was taken to meet her. And basically, this was a lady who was a Labour voter and who said was very proud to go to her Asian neighbour's wedding. But then some Eastern Europeans moved into a street. They didn't really observe the unofficial but accepted street rules. They didn't put the rubbish out in the right way and so on and so forth. And she was really worried that even in sharing that concern and frustration, that she, a Labour voter, would be judged as racist by a Labour politician. And I thought that's searingly honest. And that is him speaking to reform voters, to people who might have voted Labour historically, but have definitely flirted with reform, if not become reform voters and supporters. That is him speaking to them to say, I get it. I understand something of where you're coming from. And he's speaking to the Labour traditional supporters to say, again, concerns about immigration, that is something that we have to grapple with and face up to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a really good example of the way in which politics has shifted. So do you remember the story, I think it was the 2010 election, with Gordon Brown?
Yes.
And I'm afraid I can't remember the lady's name, but she was raising, well, I mean, similar-ish sort of things around immigration.
Yes.
And then there was that famous bit where Gordon Brown was caught on his microphone, caught on camera, going, "Oh, that bigoted woman, whose idea was it to put me in with her?"
That's it. Yes.
We are now in a very different position, aren't we?
That's right. And of course, this then, I think, speaks to that wider kind of issue that's going on in society at the moment, where on the one hand, you have people who have instinctively been very pro-immigration, now concerned, and I think unsure politically where to go. And then you have the rise of reform who are very explicitly, we're going to remove indefinite leave to remain. We're going to do a mass deportation program over the whole parliament. We're going to remove hundreds of thousands of people from the country. And I think that within all of that, you then have a sort of Christian language being used to kind of sanctify and bless some of that language around immigration, say, yes, strong borders are a Christian thing. And do you know what I mean? You kind of beginning to understand how what's happening politically and then what's happening in the church as well. The two obviously are impacting each other, which is really, really interesting, although I would argue quite concerning.
Yeah, I think I would agree, and we could sort of come on to that. And I think the final thing which I want to draw out of the speech, because I think it links with what you're saying, is Labour are really trying to reclaim the word patriotism, aren't they? And
Yes.
we had Keir Starmer's Love Actually moment where I sort of struggle. I really kind of struggle to see poor Keir Starmer. I think he's never going to shake off a reputation for just being quite a dull guy. But you remember that bit in Love Actually where the Prime Minister is kind of really socking it to the Americans.
Yes.
And, well, this was Keir Starmer's moment, where in this country of boundless creativity and of culture, history, music, art and sporting brilliance, of world-class educators, fearless entrepreneurs, the grit of the lionesses, the swagger of Oasis, the strength of the Red Roses, beauty from the South Downs to the Shetland Isles. And I'm sort of imagining the Labour crowd going, yes, yes.
With their Union Jack.
Yeah, like cheering
Yes.
him on. Labour is, I think Labour is desperate to appeal to that traditional base and show that actually we're patriotic too,
Yeah.
and they don't want to just kind of leave that space to reform. And so reform have always sort of reform, and to some extent the Conservatives have a much easier job on that kind of thing, because as you've alluded to already, the sort of right-wing politics tends to involve a kind of stronger border policy.
Yeah.
Tends to be more wedded to some of the historic institutions. Labour have had difficulties in recent years where, I mean, Keir Starmer was notoriously anti-monarchy when he was younger. You had Jeremy Corbyn, will he sing the national anthem? Will he bow to the Queen? Kind of, does he believe in the nuclear deterrent? Like all that kind of thing where you're like, well, gosh, this is not a great look for Labour with their traditional base.
No.
But here we've got Keir Starmer trying to say, actually, no, you can be in Labour and be patriotic, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And sort of not wanting to like abandon the flag, if you will, to people who they disagree with.
I think it says everything about where the government are at, that this speech, I think, will buy him time.
Yeah.
And that's about it. I don't think it's going to shift the dial. You might see, as has happened occasionally, a little bit of movement in the polls. But I don't think this is going to be the sort of ultimate game changer. And he needs to now build on this. And you need to basically match this level of communication consistently for the next 4 years to have even a shot at winning the next election. And if he just slips back into that slightly bureaucratic, I'm going to make some boring announcement about digital IDs because I've run out of ideas. That's not going to cut it. I think that's the challenge for him now, is can he continue to tell this story, and can he maintain that narrative of politics of grievance versus politics of national renewal? I mean, I did notice that Churches got one mention just before the bit that you read out. He talked about the flag, the yellow and blue flag flying on churches and village halls, the length and breadth of this country. Is that broken Britain? I
do feel like we're becoming slightly spitting image-esque, which is perhaps not the truth and grace we always aspire to.
Well, yes. I mean, there's not a lot of truth and there's definitely no grace. So you're absolutely right. But I think the flag waving thing is just so interesting because it was something he did in opposition. He had to do all of his speeches with a big Union Jack behind him. So clearly that whole, they recognise it's a perceived weakness of Labour that they're not really patriotic and they need to answer that. But I think this does perhaps link us on quite nicely into Christian nationalism. Yeah. Which, is something that you might have been reading about, you might have be aware of, you may not be aware of it. So perhaps let me start just by sketching out very basically what Christian nationalism is. And in one sense, that's impossible because it has many incarnations and its proponents are not all agreed on every aspect of it. But very, very basically, Christian nationalism is a belief that you can have Christian nations in this world, in this present age that we're in. And a Christian nation is one where largely state and church are quite connected and where the laws of the land to varying degrees will follow the law of God that we find in the Old Testament. Again, there'd be some disagreement around that. And at the more extreme end, it would believe that you should indeed outlaw other religions because they are idolatry. And so the kind of more historic emphasis on religious liberty and that kind of thing. This would almost be a reaction against that. So Christian nationalism is a belief that actually politics and Christianity very much belong together. In fact, Christianity should really dominate politics. And I think, working for an organization like CARE, this raises some fascinating questions and tensions for us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So that's what Christian nationalism is. And I think the reason that we're talking about it now is because the Unite the Kingdom rally, for example, organized by Tommy Robinson a few weeks ago, there was street preachers there were preachers from the stage, the Lord's Prayer was said and used, there were banners to say Christ reigns. There's been a big march recently in Dublin, for example, of Christians with the same kind of banner, Jesus reigns, looking to kind of reclaim the streets. And let's not forget that CARE has its origin in a mass rally in Trafalgar Square with Christians and banners saying moral pollution needs a solution, and the solution is Jesus. So our origin story actually begins in a movement that is very different on one hand, because it was not a Tommy Robinson right-wing rally that took place. No. But that shared sense of our country needs something different. That's something that we can connect with. So this is why I think we need to be careful when talking about Christian nationalism, that we don't throw the baby out the bathwater.
Yeah.
Because we at least want to believe the best in some of the motives and the agendas of those who are promoting it.
Yeah, and I mean, it is absolutely a Christian principle to want a nation to flourish and the people in that nation to flourish. There's that famous verse in Jeremiah 29:7, which is when Israel had been sent into exile, and Jeremiah says, "We'll seek the welfare of a city where I have sent you."
Yeah,
and we do believe again that within God's word there is truth and there is wisdom which will lead to human flourishing.
Yes,
and so we do believe that the Bible holds the key to how to live life, and we do therefore want the gospel to impact politics. But there's still quite a difference between that and saying we want a Christian nation, whatever that means, isn't there?
That's right. I mean, there's a difference between a Christian ruled or Christian dominated nation and a Christian influencing the nation. And CARE would always position itself very firmly, and we believe Christians should be influencing government. We believe Christians should be going into politics, and we have an entire leadership program that really is aimed at that end, to raise up leaders, to be members of parliament, to be government ministers, and so on and so forth. But for me, one of the striking things about Christian nationalism, and particularly the variation that comes from America, where arguably I think you could say it had its origins, is it seems to be connected with a particular form of eschatology. So eschatology is the doctrine of last things. And broadly speaking, there's the premillennial view, Jesus returns, and then he has a millennial reign, figuratively or literally, from earth. And then there's a time of great tribulation, and then the church is raptured out of that. That's classical premillennialism. So there's another variation, but I won't go into that. There's amillennialism, which is probably the dominant view now within the conservative church, which is that it's symbolic. We're in the millennium now. It's the church age between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. And some disagreement within that on exactly sequence of events. And then there's post-millennialism, which is the idea that there will be a golden age of Christian dominance across the world, where the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. They would actually see most of that being fulfilled before the second coming of Christ. And they would use verses like Malachi 1:11, your name shall be great among all Gentile nations, as kind of proof of this, and other texts. And I find it really significant that a lot of Christian nationalist proponents are in agreement with that theology. And I'll just say one more thing on that. That, for me, raises a big tension, because I have a lot of sympathy with a post-millennial way of understanding things. That's not me saying I'm fully signed up to it, but I do have sympathy with some of what they hold to. And I know that within the Reformed constituency, historically, there were many great thinkers and theologians who were very post-millennial. So William Carey, the father of modern missions, he was a convinced post-millennialist, and it had a big impact on his desire to get out to the heathen nations, as they were then called. So again, it raises a really interesting question of eschatology gets us so far with understanding this movement. But at the end of the day, the real question for me is, do we have an over-realized eschatology? Do we expect too much this side of Christ's coming in terms of what we can do in the nations? Because I think that's one of the problems with Christian nationalism. It almost expects too much. I just don't think, if you read the whole of the New Testament, our expectation at the end of it is, good news, everyone, the world will be Christianized before Jesus comes back.
No, I would completely agree with that. I don't think that, but I don't see that expectation in there at all. I think the other thing to raise at this point, which is potentially helpful, is it's not just about what the church can do, but it's about how it does it.
Yeah.
So we might think, well, wouldn't it be a great thing if the nation sort of subscribed to Christian values and everyone became a Christian? And like, on one level, like, of course we want people to come to faith in Jesus, but the way in which the church goes about that is so significant. And this has been one of the ways in which the church has always been massively countercultural.
Yeah.
And you look at the spread of the gospel compared to the spread of other faiths. So to give just one example, Islam first of all spread by the sword of Muhammad.
Yeah.
Whereas the earliest disciples were put to the sword, and the gospel spread through suffering. And you look at a sort of Christianity's relationship with power and being in power across the centuries, and what it has tended to lead to is people who are verbally subscribing to faith in Jesus becoming less like Jesus, because they end up looking like everyone else, pursuing the same power with the same greed and the same selfishness. So there's a bit in Chris Wright's book, Here Are Your Gods, which I think is quite helpful, which I'll just read out. So Chris writes, it seemed natural, perhaps even providential, that the power of the state should promote and protect the interests of Christianity, while it might be hoped that Christianity would sanctify the workings of the state. Unfortunately, the price Christianity paid for its protection was its own corruption and complicity in the greed, ambition, immorality, endless conflicts, and endemic violence of all too fallen and sinful human power structures, and those who use them for their own enrichment. In gaining the world, or at least a continent, we lost our own soul. And then he finishes, when we declare that Jesus is Lord and not Caesar, we are acknowledging that we are called to follow the Jesus of the cross, not the Jesus of Constantine. Which I think is so helpful when you put this in the context of actually what we've seen in the UK.
Yes.
And sort of some of the marches and some of the language which is being used at some of those marches in the UK, and particularly some of the figures. So the likes of a Tommy Robinson, who, let's not forget, is a multiply convicted criminal and essentially a bit of a street thug. I have real concerns about Christians being too closely allied with a figure like that.
And I think that at the moment anyway, what I hope will happen is that the church will recognize that there is a major exegetical problem with Christian nationalism. And that is that the phrase Christian nation is so difficult to define.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you mean by that?
I completely agree. I was going to come on to that as well.
And I think that from my understanding, for a nation to be truly, truly Christian, that must mean that every person within it is regenerate. And one of the big lessons from the Old Testament is God enters into a national covenant with one nation that he chooses. And he chooses to locate and place his name over a geopolitical entity. And he gave them his law, which is a shining example of holiness and purity. And it is a freedom-giving path, except that group of people were always a mixed multitude. There was a remnant within it who believed, who trusted in the coming Messiah. But there were people who belonged to that covenant who did not believe. And look at the record of the kings. How many of the kings were corrupted by the power that they had in both Israel and then later in Judah as well?
Yeah.
And it seems to me that this is the fundamental error, which is you cannot Christianize a nation via law, because the law can address the outside. It's like Jesus, woe to the Pharisees. You clean the outside, but inside you're defiled. And I think that's the issue, which is one of the differences between the old and new covenants is the new covenant is a covenant goes right into the heart, because that's the big promise, Jeremiah 31, that the Spirit will replace and take away the heart of stone, and you'll have a new heart. And so suddenly, in Jesus comes, he fulfills the Old Testament, fulfills all the promises. He is the new Israel. And so Gentiles start getting engrafted into the people of God. But under the new covenant, it's a spiritual membership where the condition that God meets and God provides is a new heart. And so God doesn't place his name over a specific geopolitical entity any longer.
Yeah.
He places his name over his church, which he's drawing out to fulfill the promises to Abraham of blessing to the whole world from every single people, tribe, tongue, and nation. And so there is now a Christian nation, but it's in 1 Peter 2:9.
Yeah.
It's the church. You are a holy nation.
Yeah.
Holy meaning devoted to God, given to God, consecrated to God. So that's it's almost like I can understand something of the heart and the impulse behind Christian nationalism, and I share some, not all, some of its desires. I want to see the nation more impacted by Christianity. But they don't really define Christian nation. They're not all agreed on that. They can't really define it. And I just think biblically, the only Christian nation that now exists is the church.
Yeah.
That's it. And so the expectation issue is there, but it is also an exegetical issue as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really helpful. We've talked about then some relationships with country which we don't necessarily agree with.
Yes.
What would a positive biblical vision of our relationship with our nation actually look like?
Dan Strange calls us alienated residents, I think is his line. And this is, it's just, theologians are so funny. Yeah, Dad's great, but it's a classic kind of theologian's line, because you have to sort of scratch your head and think about it for quite a while. But it's making a really important point, which is we take the view that this present world, when it talks about being destroyed by fire in 2 Peter, the analogy in the text is with the flood. And the flood didn't destroy the entire world so that we had a brand new earth come into existence. It was an act of judgment over this world. And I think this world will be renewed, which means that Dan's point is actually the meek will inherit the earth. We will inherit this earth, but it will be renewed. It will be purified. It will be removed of the dross, as it were. So we do belong here in one sense, even though our citizenship is in heaven. And I guess my point is that therefore, I think that it is appropriate for us to care about the country where God has placed us.
Yeah.
We represent a particular culture. We come from a particular sort of tribe, as it were, and it is not wrong to feel a loyalty to that tribe.
Yeah.
You know, nowhere in the Bible, in the New Testament, do you find the call to abandon and to not care about the place where you are. It's to seek the good of the city, but your allegiance is now higher. So that's the balance, isn't it? That's the tension.
I might jump in there, because there's a verse which would often be used, and I think probably not quite fully grappling with the rest of Pauline theology.
Yes,
which some people would use at this point. So some people would, in a sense, rightly look at the verse in Galatians where Paul says, "In Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek."
Yes.
Now, what Paul's primary point there is your identity is rooted ultimately in something much bigger and better than that. Your identity is in Christ. That doesn't mean that sort of distinctions around being male or female or Jew or Greek have completely gone, because we know that there are other bits in Paul where he does give different instructions, say, to men and women.
Yeah.
So it's not like those things have stopped existing full stop, but it is that actually their place in your identity has been massively surpassed.
Yes, and transformed.
And transformed by being in Jesus. And you can sort of see the way that works for Paul in Philippians, because there's that bit, isn't there, when he talks about how he's a Hebrew of Hebrews.
But also Romans 9. I have unceasing anguish in my heart for my people.
Yeah.
Like he wants to be cut off from his own primary identity. I mean, he's speaking in hyperbole.
Yeah.
For the sake
because he loves his people.
Because he loves his people.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, absolutely. So There is an element, I think, in which we do still we have some sort of allegiance to our country, but there is a higher throne to which we ultimately have allegiance. And I'm just going to pick up on one other bit you mentioned there. So you mentioned the verse, "Our citizenship is in heaven."
Yes.
Which is a really helpful verse. Again, that's Philippians 3.
Yes.
But also, if you think about the context Paul is writing in there, so Philippi was effectively a Roman colony.
Yes.
This is a colony which is made up of Roman soldiers. And the way in which sort of Roman citizenship worked was you were supposed to bring a bit of Rome to the colony you were in. So you're supposed to bring Rome to the place you are. And so that is actually sort of what Paul has in mind when he's talking, our citizenship is in heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven, but that doesn't mean it's just supposed to be reserved for heaven. It's supposed to bring a bit of heaven to earth.
And that is also the case in, again, stepping back, we are part of the kingdom of God. And the kingdom of God is found wherever, in fact, your namesake, although I don't think you're a relation, which is, there was a theologian, I can't remember the first names, but second name was Ladd.
George Eldon
who did
Ladd.
a lot of writing, that's right, on the kingdom of God. And actually, it really helped to popularize inaugurated eschatology in the now and the not yet. But that applies because we're members of the kingdom of heaven, members of the kingdom of God. That has broken in. It is a present reality. So in that sense, we are already bringing some of God's kingdom to earth. We build for the kingdom. We evidence the values of the kingdom. We reflect the new age, the world to come. And we are, in actual fact, in some mysterious way, contributing towards that new world.
Completely.
As we reflect Christ and represent Christ. And I think that, again, this is why it's going to be such an important thing for the church to not just ignore Christian nationalism. It's actually an opportunity for the church to go back to eschatology and re-ask some of these really important questions, not assume everybody in the church, everyone in our congregations understands all of these things, but it's a chance to go back, to reread, to rethink, to pray over, to be clear, why do I reject Christian nationalism, whatever that means, or elements of it, and can I make a fair assessment on what is good, what is bad, what is ugly about it, and we haven't touched on that, because I don't want anybody coming away thinking I can't love the UK, I can't wave the St. George flag, I can't wave the Union Jack, that somehow that's a betrayal of my true identity. I don't think it is at all. But we still want that guardrail of saying, as you said, your ultimate identity, the transcendent identity of your life is that you're in Christ. And I think the other point that you made in the article on Friday was that, make sure that in loving your country, you love all within your countries, the love your neighbor command, again, isn't it? Don't just limit it to people who are like me and similar to me. So there is a challenge there as well, for all of us.
Completely. And I think actually just to sort of bring things full circle in terms of something you were mentioning earlier. So I completely agree with the idea of we are allowed to love being British. And
woo!
I am thoroughly in that camp.
I'm Scottish.
It's a bit like Andy Murray. He's Scottish when he loses and he's British when he wins.
Can I just point out that our producer laughed when I said that?
Gosh, that's a first, isn't it?
Well, not... yeah.
Just low blow.
Just leave that with you.
But no, to pick up on something which you just said, because it does take things back to Keir Starmer's speech, you mentioned sort of things like being able to love the flag. And these things exist in contexts as well. And so the ways in which I think we have seen flags being used in recent weeks, where you have flags alongside a message effectively saying go home, is something which Keir Starmer absolutely picks up on, or where you're using effectively English symbols to imply that someone else doesn't belong here and isn't British. These things don't just exist in a bubble. Currently, the way in which flags are being used is predominantly, I think, as weapons more than as pride. And so I think we do need to be mindful of our neighbour and the connotations which certain actions currently have. And that does not mean that the flag will be seen as that in 5 years' time, but that is the moment we are currently in. And so I think there just needs to be a little bit of sensitivity about the way we're using some of these symbols.
I I think it is a wise policy for churches to employ, to just have a zero flag policy, personally. And that's not because I don't like the Union Jack flag. It's because I think that the risks and the danger of unintentional alienation in our often, particularly in London, diverse congregations are pretty significant. Because I think you're right. That flag can mean a million different things to a million different people. For some, it means pain. And a record of wrongs of this country. And that's the other thing that I find I get very frustrated by, which is it feels very difficult to have an honest conversation about the good that Britain has done around the world. And
I agree with that as well.
Amazing good.
Yeah.
But also the evil that has been perpetrated, not just by Britain, but by other countries as well.
Yeah.
And that works in both ways, of course. But
does,
do you know what I mean? That's a whole other conversation.
Yes. Also, actually, in Friday's long read.
Yes, that's right. You did it. Yes. Do check out care.org.uk. Every Friday, we do a long read on the big story of the week. This week, we're actually covering for our chief executive who's on holiday, so it will probably be myself writing. So please forgive me in advance for whatever I come up with, and please pray for me as well, because I wasn't due to write this week. I was due to not write this week.
No, indeed.
And I'm staring at you in the vain hope that you might come like a white knight, like a knight on a shining white horse over the horizon to say, "Don't worry, James. I know that you're speaking on Saturday and speaking on Sunday. We'll come up with some other arrangement." Didn't we just recruit for your comms team? Haven't we just given you more resource?
We have, which we're very excited about.
Welcome, Dan, to the care team.
I think this week my sympathy is limited. Given I've written I think 4 out of the last 7. I think
someone's counting. You tallied that one up, didn't you?
Love keeps no record of wrongs, but I do.
It certainly kept a record of that wrong, didn't it? Yeah. Point received. Yeah.
No, it'd been great to chat as ever. I think we've covered a whole lot of really interesting ground there.
And we are committed at Care. I think we've talked already, but are committed as well to continuing to talk about these things, hopefully, helpfully. We haven't actually covered the question that we received.
You're quite right.
Via Spotify. Now, do we want to cover that now, or shall we put it out there and say, we had a fantastic question come in via Spotify, a really important question. So whoever sent that in, thank you very, very much. We've received it, we acknowledge it, and we will absolutely answer it. But what we are hoping is, why don't, especially given what we've talked about today, if you have questions about Christian nationalism, if you have questions about patriotism, if you've got questions about the current political moment that we find ourselves in, send them in. And maybe in time we'll be able to do a kind of one where we just work through listener and those watching, work through your questions. So that's my challenge to you. If you love this podcast, if you're enjoying it, send us your questions and we'll do an entire episode working through the questions that you send in. So that's your challenge. If you meet it, we will provide. And to the person who has already sent one in, even if we don't get any more questions sent in, and I'm sure that we will answer your question next week or next time on the podcast. How about that?
That sounds great.
Fantastic. Peter, as ever, a great joy, a great pleasure, and Nate, dare I say, a privilege to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. I feel very flattered.
That's good. Was it a privilege for you to be with me?
Of course.
Oh, there we go. And was it a privilege for both of us to be with our producer, Isaac?
Always.
Always, even though he laughed at the fact I'm Scottish. Goodbye. See you next time.
Good to see you, James.